Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the ancient world where sun gods scowl, wine flows a little too freely, and one divine troublemaker tries to turn the land of pyramids into the land of parties. Picture this golden sand stretching into the horizon, sacred cats staring you down, and somewhere in the heat haze a toga-clad figure wiping sweat from his brow, muttering something about terroir and branding opportunities. That's right, you're about to watch Dionysus, Greek god of wine, try to open a winery in ancient Egypt. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Between divine politics, crocodile cults, and the occasional cursed amphora, the odds are not in your favour. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge off a rickety boat and immediately regret wearing sandals. The Nile Delta's heat smacks you like a kiln door, swinging open. Behind you, Dionysus is grinning. He's got that new startup smell vibe. In one hand, a woven basket of vine cuttings. In the other, a golden goblet sloshing with something dark and potent. He steps onto Egyptian soil like he owns it, announcing to no one in particular, "This is going to be delicious." You squint at the horizon, where temple spires shimmer in the distance. The locals eye Dionysus like he's some sort of hallucination. And maybe he did sail in on a ship crewed by satyrs and dolphins. What's clear is that Dionysus has plans, big ones. He wants to bring the art of winemaking to Egypt, which is mostly beer country at this point. Grapes here are rare fermentation, even rarer, and the average beverage menu leans more toward date palm syrup than Cabernet Sauvignon. But Dionysus isn't deterred. After all, he is the god of wine madness and improbable success stories. He starts by scouting land, dragging you along under the guise of consulting. Mostly you carry amphorae and swat flies. "This is perfect," he says, stopping at a sun-blasted plot outside Memphis. The ground is cracked, the sun unbearable, and the only sign of life is a lone ibis pecking at something unidentifiable. Still he grins. You can taste the potential. To be fair, the Nile does have its moments. Every year, it floods, depositing rich silt that makes the region bloom. But that doesn't mean you can just plant some Greek vines and expect a vineyard by spring. Dionysus, however, seems to think that's exactly how it works. Locals are less enthused. One priest scoffs, "We already have gods," and beverages. Another mutters about plagues and foreign influence. But Dionysus is undeterred. He offers samples. Tiny clay cups poured from amphorae, sealed with beeswax and tied with purple ribbons. The effect mixed. One farmer hiccups, then starts weeping about his grandmother. Another begins dancing with a camel. A third calmly walks into the river. That's when the rumours begin, that a new god has come peddling laughter and lunacy in a cup, that the wine makes you see things, that the ibis now speaks fluent Attic Greek. The buzz grows especially among the younger crowd, who start sneaking into Dionysus' newly built wine hut at dusk, for what you might charitably call tastings, but more honestly resemble full-blown toga raves. One scholarly fact: the Greeks did bring wine culture with them wherever they travelled, including Egypt during the Ptolemaic period. Vines were cultivated in the Nile Valley by 3000 BCE, but under Greek influence, winemaking became more refined and more religiously significant. But Dionysus isn't exactly playing it safe. He sets up a mini vineyard, draping imported vines over reeds and building elaborate trellises with instructions scribbled in wine-stained scrolls. You help install an irrigation system that's basically buckets and hope. There's even an altar made of old bread ovens and painted with grapes. It's not elegant, but it's earnest. One night, under a velvet sky pulsing with stars, Dionysus raises a cup and toasts the land. "To Egypt, may your gods be tolerant and your grapes be juicy." You're not sure if anyone else hears him, but the frogs croak louder and a soft wind brushes the reeds. It feels, strangely blessed, but not everyone is on board. Some locals whisper that the wine is cursed, that it makes people act out, that someone tried to marry a goat. You remind Dionysus of these complaints. He waves you off. That's just part of the process. Besides, some gods want to be challenged. Historians still argue whether Dionysian influence in Egypt was welcomed or simply tolerated. Greek settlers often tried blending their rituals with local customs, but the deeper, older traditions of Egypt didn't always mesh well with imported chaos gods, especially ones handing out hallucinogenic wine at funerals. Oh, and speaking of funerals, one priest shows up furious, claiming someone poured Dionysus's vintage into a ceremonial jar meant for offerings to Osiris. He winked at me, the priest hisses. The jar did. Dionysus just chuckles. That means he liked it. At this point, you're not sure if this is a cultural exchange or the slow collapse of reality, but the vineyard grows, slowly. A few stubborn clusters of grapes begin to ripen under the scorching sun. Dionysus claps you on the back. See, we're in business. A quirky tidbit in real ancient Egypt wine was considered a luxury good, often reserved for priests, nobles, and the dead. Some tombs included elaborate wine lists, scratched into the walls, basically ancient bottle service menus. As the days pass, more people trickle in. Some just want to drink, others are curious. A few start to believe, and you're somewhere in between, half convinced Dionysus might actually pull this off, half preparing for divine retribution, in the form of a locust swarm, shaped like a wine bottle. Still for now, the night is calm. The air smells like crushed grapes and Nile water. You sit beneath a palm tree, sip a cup of something shockingly decent, and watch Dionysus teach a goat how to stomp grapes. Honestly, it's hard not to admire the madness. The sun rises thick and orange over the fledgling vineyard, casting long shadows from the crooked trellises and half-buried amphorae. Dionysus is already awake, which is suspicious. Gods of revelry aren't known for being early risers. You find him inspecting grape leaves with the gravity of a royal physician. They're listening, he whispers, stroking one like it's a kitten. They like Egyptian soil. You nod slowly and make a mental note to stay hydrated today. Word is spreading, not just among curious farmers and wandering traders, but among the priests and temple bureaucrats, who definitely weren't invited to any of Dionysus's impromptu nighttime festivities. They've started sending messengers, first polite, now pointed. A representative from the Temple of Thoth would like to observe your operations. One says clearly, meaning investigate, and possibly shut you down. Dionysus beams. Perfect. Perfect. Pour them the good stuff. You're immediately tasked with finding what constitutes the good stuff, which turns out to be an amphora, labelled with a grape doodle, and something that might say vintage in poorly scrawled Greek. You hope the priest likes notes of plum sandalwood and mild, existential dread. Meanwhile, Dionysus decides to add flair. We need a mascot, he announces mid-afternoon, wearing a papyrus wreath and nothing else, a sacred symbol. You suggest a falcon, or maybe a lion. He chooses a donkey named Clarity and paints it purple. Later that week, Clarity eats a scroll, trips over a wine press, and wanders into a priestly procession. The Temple of Anubis is not amused. You spend a full morning smoothing things over, explaining that the donkey is an allegory. But trouble is brewing, quite literally. The Nile's flood this year is late, and the air is beginning to taste like dust and suspicion. Farmers are murmuring about divine disapproval. Crops are wilting. And in the market square, a rival beverage stand appears Osiris Brew, locally fermented, spiritually approved. Dionysus scoffs. Please, you can't even dance to that. He throws a wine festival in retaliation. It's an extravagant week-long event with flutes, fire dancers, roasted figs, and a semi-legal chariot race through the vineyard. You play traffic guard with a papyrus fan, waving drunken satyrs away from irrigation channels. Still, it's magical. People laugh. Music fills the air. Grapes are stomped in vats lined with lotus petals. Even Clarity gets a second chance at fame, dancing a clumsy jig to the beat of reed drums. but not everyone's clapping. Temple officials from Memphis arrive during the final evening procession, their robes starched and disapproving. This behaviour is unsanctioned, one declares, eyeing the drunken chorus line of crocodile handlers. It lacks ritual clarity. Dionysus offers them a cup. Try it, you'll understand. They do, and within the hour, one is clapping along to a lyre solo, while another debates wine pairings with a sphinx sculptor. You assume the third escaped through a papyrus hedge. One historical note: ancient Egypt's religious system was famously flexible, absorbing deities from other cultures, especially during periods of foreign influence. Still, a deity like Dionysus, whose rituals involved ecstatic dancing and wild abandon, clashed with Egypt's highly ordered priesthood. That tension comes to a head when someone dares Dionysus to stage a ritual inside the temple of Bastet. You try to stop him. They have laws, you know. He grins. And I have wine. You sigh and start packing an apology basket. The ritual is beautiful, to be fair. Dancers in indigo and saffron swirl like flames. Incense clouds the air. Offerings of dates and wine are laid before a statue of Bastet, and for a brief golden moment you swear the goddess smiles. Then a satyr knocks over a brazier and sets part of the altar cloth on fire. You flee into the streets with Dionysus, yelling, "Improvisation is the soul of ritual." Some locals now see him as a trickster god, useful in small doses, terrifying when bored, and yet others are intrigued. A group of young priests from the outskirts begin experimenting with hybrid rituals, pouring wine into traditional libation bowls, composing hymns with a beat you could actually dance to. They say it opens the spirit. Historians still argue whether these shifts were organic or forced. Did the youth genuinely feel called by Dionysus's philosophy of joyful chaos, or were they just rebelling against their overbearing uncles in linen headdresses? Either way, the movement grows. Wine becomes more than a novelty, it's a symbol of change, of pleasure, of resistance against rigid order. And you're promoted to chief vineyard steward, which mostly means yelling at goats and trying to keep the fermentation barrels from exploding. A quirky tidbit: some ancient Egyptian tombs depict grape-stomping scenes, with what appear to be musical instruments nearby, suggesting the act was as much performance as production. Basically vintage TikTok content. Still, not everything is a Bacchic fantasy. Tensions rise. A drought creeps over the land. Dionysus starts pacing, muttering about needing divine cross-pollination. You suspect he means a PR campaign. He decides to host a sacred procession down the Nile. You, of course, have to organise it. Picture this: barges adorned with ivy, and gold dancers in teal sashes, sacred cats reclining on embroidered cushions. Dionysus rides at the helm, holding a goblet the size of a toddler, as the flotilla drifts past. Crumbling statues and sunburnt fields, villagers watch in awe, and some in fear. Is this a wedding, one asks? A war, another whispers. You shrug. Honestly, it's just Tuesday. But then something unexpected happens. The skies open. Rain, actual rain, falls for the first time in weeks. People weep, crops drink, and Dionysus just lifts his cup to the clouds like it was all part of the plan. You're not sure what just happened, miracle, coincidence, or just really good timing. Still, in that moment, as the rain patters over vineyards and rivers, as laughter echoes down the banks, and Clarity brays her approval from the barge, you realise somehow, impossibly, this might be working. By the next morning, everything smells like wet clay and celebration. The Nile gleams like a fresh strip of polished bronze, and children run barefoot between puddles with grape-stained toes. Dionysus is lounging beneath a fig tree, wearing a crown of soaked lotus petals, and sipping something you hope is diluted wine. You see, he says, gesturing broadly, the land approves. You, of course, are the one who has to coordinate the post-festival cleanup. It takes 3 days to locate Clarity, who has somehow wandered into a ceremonial tomb and now refuses to leave because the acoustics are better in here. But something has shifted. The local farmers, once sceptical, begin planting grapevines along the Nile's edge, Small, clumsy trellises rise beside the papyrus reeds. Amphorae workshops start popping up like mushrooms after rain. Even a few cautious temple scribes admit it might be economically viable. Still, not everyone is enchanted. High priests from Heliopolis send word that Dionysus's antics threaten spiritual harmony. They cite omens, a raven landing on a sacred obelisk, a goat sneezing during a sunrise ceremony, and a dream someone had about a jackal wearing lipstick. Typical religious pushback, Dionysus mutters, swirling his drink. They're just jealous we're fun, but he knows the threat is real. Egyptian religious structure is precise, layered, and old, very old. The idea that a foreign deity could not only show up uninvited, but throw massive parties and accidentally summon rain is both fascinating and terrifying to the religious elite. You learn quickly that change in ancient Egypt is more of a slow ripple than a cannonball splash. Dionysus responds with diplomacy. Sort of. He announces a festival of divine exchange, promising it will honour both Greek and Egyptian traditions. He sends polite invitations, sealed with wax stamps, featuring a dancing ibis and a satyr holding hands. You personally deliver a scroll to the Temple of Horus, where the high priest reads it aloud, frowns and mutters, "Why is there glitter?" Preparations are chaotic, as usual. A hybrid ritual schedule is drafted, combining Greek libation ceremonies with Egyptian offering chants. You help design the altar space columns, wrapped in ivy offerings, of honeycakes and lotus wine, and a statue of Bastet, now wearing a tiny ivy crown. Compromise, Dionysus says, is a fashion statement. On the big day, the sacred grove is transformed. Wicker baskets overflow with figs and dates. Musicians in teal and russet play lyres beside reed flutes. A crocodile dubbed Sir Waddlington is allowed to attend wearing a garland of garlic blossoms. You watch as people arrive from every direction, farmers in linen skirts, priests in shimmering white robes, Greek sailors with sunburned shoulders. They mingle trade stories, share drinks. A young priest offers a blessing in ancient Egyptian, and a Greek oracle answers with a song that makes the cats purr and the birds freeze mid-air. It's oddly beautiful. And for a few moments it works. Then the debate starts. A priest from the Temple of Isis takes offence at the satyr's dance. A Greek merchant claims the sacred ibis winked at him and insists on a wedding. A donkey eats a papyrus hymn sheet, so Waddlington knocks over an amphora and promptly slips into a wine nap. The ceremony dissolves into polite chaos. But even amid the confusion, laughter spreads. People begin dancing again. Two rival priests end up arm in arm chanting hybrid prayers while stomping grapes. Someone lights sparklers made from dried reeds and lotus oil. It isn't orderly, but it's honest. Historians still argue whether these fusion rituals represented the start of syncretism, or were just theatrical diplomacy. Was this the birth of a new belief system, or simply a very enthusiastic potluck? Either way, you see the shift. Where once there was resistance, now there's curiosity. People begin asking questions. What if joy itself is sacred? What if gods like Dionysus don't replace old ones, but simply bring different music to the same dance? A quirky tidbit, ancient Egyptian wine was often reserved for royalty and rituals. Everyday people usually drank beer. So when Dionysus poured wine for commoners, it felt like a small revolution, like sneaking cake into a diet temple. But not everyone's sipping the Kool-Aid. Whispers grow of a faction forming an opposition, a coalition of conservative priests, grain merchants, and crocodile trainers who believe Dionysus is upsetting the natural order. They call themselves the Circle of Ma'at, after the concept of cosmic balance. You call them the Great Party Poopers. They demand a formal trial, yes, a trial, to determine whether Dionysus is a true god or a dangerously charismatic con man. You try to object. He made it rain during a drought, but they argue that even tricksters can mimic miracles. One elder cites the time a baboon predicted an eclipse by accident. Dionysus is delighted. A trial excellent. I'll wear a toga made of vineyard leaves. You plead with him to take it seriously. He promises He will then immediately commissions a lyre solo titled Objection the Song, and so it begins. A sacred tribunal is scheduled at the Hall of Judgment in Thebes. You travel ahead to prepare, making sure there's seating shade and a discreet bucket of emergency wine under the defendant's podium. The hall itself is massive white stone columns, cool marble floors, and a statue of Ma'at with her ostrich feather poised in judgment. Dionysus arrives dramatically, carried on a palanquin made from wine barrels, waving at the crowd like he's headlining a royal wedding. He steps forward, clears his throat, and begins, not with a defence but a toast. To life, to laughter, to grapes, he says, raising his goblet, and to the delightful absurdity of being judged by mortals. You bury your face in your hands. Still his words have weight. He speaks of joy as a divine force, of how music and wine and dance are not distractions, but conduits to the sacred. The tribunal listens. Some scoff, some nod. One starts quietly weeping into a scroll. A sacred scribe challenges him. But where is your temple, your order, your legacy? Dionysus responds, my temple is wherever a soul dares to laugh. My order is chaos, yes, but joyful chaos. And my legacy. Look around. He gestures to the audience, now split between solemn priests and giggling children, blowing wine bubbles through reeds. You realise something, whether or not the tribunal rules in Dionysus's favour. Something irreversible has happened. The people have seen a new way to be sacred, and they aren't unseeing it. The tribunal adjourns with the sort of indecisive muttering you'd expect from people who just witnessed a god on trial and sort of enjoyed it. The final verdict, further deliberation required. In Egyptian legalese, that means please stall while we figure out how to handle this PR disaster. Dionysus doesn't wait for clarity. Perfect, he says, kicking off his sandals. Let's open another vineyard. You remind him the first one is still technically underwater from the miracle flood. He waves this off. It'll make the grapes dramatic. You spend the next several days travelling upstream in a papyrus skiff, scouting for higher ground. The bank's narrow crocodiles lounge like judgmental lifeguards, and the air thickens with that unique blend of lotus pollen and imminent sunburn. You finally find a sun-soaked plateau just south of Elephantine Island. It's perfect soft soil, good drainage, and a nearby village whose main export seems to be clay amphorae and conspiracy theories. The locals are curious but cautious. Dionysus wins them over by teaching their goats to dance a generous term for rhythmic stomping while being fed fermented dates. Word spreads. Soon villagers from across the region are flocking to see the god who brings both rain and giggling livestock. And then things get bureaucratic. Enter the royal tax assessor. He arrives by barge wearing more eyeliner than seems professionally appropriate, flanked by 2 scribes and an ominous scroll the length of a fishing net. His name is Mennefer. He announces with dramatic sighs between every phrase that all vineyards fall under the jurisdiction of the Pharaoh's Grain and Liquid Yield Oversight Bureau. Dionysus listens, then offers Mennefer a goblet. Try it. It's from the flood vintage. Mennefer does. He sips. He blinks. He writes down very quietly 1 amphora for personal review. Still, rules are rules. You're forced to register the winery under Egyptian religious business code, which involves 7 different ink stamps, 2 cow-based sacrifices, and swearing an oath not to enchant the Nile's fish. Meanwhile, Dionysus holds impromptu workshops on wine blending. He names each new bottle with poetic flourish: sunset laughter, papyrus regret, and ostrich kiss. You notice more Egyptian merchants showing up at these events, asking intelligent questions, bartering with baskets of blue faience jewellery. One curious scribe named Ahmose becomes a regular. He starts translating Dionysian chants into hieroglyphics. This bit here, he says, is either about transformation or fermented camel's milk. Dionysus beams. Both are sacred. Historians still argue whether this was the first example of cross-cultural winemaking guilds. Some point to trade records and shared brewing techniques. Others claim it was just an enthusiastic god accidentally inventing a sommelier program. But beyond trade, something subtler brews the idea that joy doesn't need to be imported, it can be cultivated. The second vineyard becomes not just a farm, but a school. People learn viticulture. They sing while pruning. You overhear a child explain to her brother, the grapes have to nap before they can become brave. A quirky tidbit, some Egyptians believed wine had a spirit inside it, an actual being, usually mischievous, who lived in the bottle. Dionysus takes this, literally holding long one-sided conversations with amphora. You once catch him arguing with a red blend about artistic direction. But the joy can't drown out the growing tension. The circle of Maat resurfaces louder than ever. They claim the new vineyard is corrupting sacred balance, citing grape-based dreams, and one goat that now insists on sleeping in a pyramid. Worse, a rumour spreads that Dionysus is preparing to declare himself Pharaoh of the Vine. He denies it mostly because he's already working on a better title. Emperor of Euphoria. You advise caution. Blend in, you say. Maybe stop holding court with cats and drunken palm trees. He sighs. But that's half my personality. Still he tries. Sort of. He starts attending official ceremonies, dressed in russet and gold linen, with only subtle grape embroidery. He offers respectful nods to Ra and Thoth during sunrise rituals, even if he slips in a wink to a nearby donkey. He begins reading the Book of the Dead for inspiration, and suggests a rewrite where the final trial includes a karaoke round. A breakthrough comes when Dionysus befriends a priestess of Hathor named Neferet. She's sharp, funny, and deeply curious about this strange god of wine. Hathor is joy, music, fertility, she says. You're not her rival, you're her echo. Together they plan a joint festival, one honouring both deities designed to blend traditions rather than blur them. Neferet insists on moderation. Dionysus agrees. No naked flute parades this time, he promises. You don't believe him, but against all odds, the Festival of Harmony is a success. There are lotus garlands, wine tastings, slow dances by torchlight. Elders nod in approval. Children chase satyrs who pass out fig candies. Neferet sings a hymn that includes both Greek and Egyptian invocations, her voice rising like incense through the night. It feels peaceful, real. The next morning, you and Dionysus sit on the vineyard steps, sipping from clay cups. You think they'll accept me? He asks. You glance at the horizon where priests are already debating, scribes are already rewriting records, and someone is painting grapes onto a temple mural. They already have, you say. A few weeks pass and life settles into a surprising rhythm, well as rhythmic as things can get with Dionysus, constantly improvising rituals that involve flower crowns and impromptu poetry slams. The second vineyard thrives, and even the crankiest elders are starting to admit that fermented joy has its place in the divine order. Grapevines twist toward the sun like sleepy cats, the Nile hums steadily, and local markets begin trading jars of festival red alongside fish and alabaster perfume bottles. Then come the dreams. At first you think it's just the heat. You wake one night sweating through your linen sheets, heart pounding with vivid images flashing in your mind. Pyramids melting into honey ibis, wings made of grapevines, a throne that drips with wine instead of blood. You don't tell Dionysus. Big mistake. Because the next day he looks at you with wide gleaming eyes and says, I had the most deliciously weird vision last night. A lion with a scroll in its mouth told me I'm meant to awaken a secret order buried under the sand. You raise one eyebrow. That sounds very normal and grounded. He nods, completely serious. I think it's time we expand. It turns out he's been corresponding with a falcon courier, no less with a semi-retired priest in Thebes. This priest, who goes by the extremely suspicious name Kemet Ra, claims to possess ancient scrolls that reference a lost cult of ecstatic agriculturalists who worshipped a hybrid deity, half Osiris, half something else. Dionysus is convinced that something else is him. You embark on the journey south, trailing through blistering heat and mosquito ambushes. Kemet Ra's home is nestled between ruined temples and goat paths. Inside it smells like dust ink and overly ambitious spirituality. He welcomes Dionysus with the reverence usually reserved for falling stars or surprise tax refunds. He shows you the scrolls, tattered papyri, inked in symbols that look suspiciously like dancing pickles. But Dionysus sees prophecy. One section mentions the laughter that stirs the vines and the golden cup that hums. You're 90% sure it's a weather report. He's 100% sure it's a divine mandate. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were authentic misinterpreted temple graffiti or just very early fan fiction. But whatever their origin, they light a spark. Within days, Dionysus is planning a revival. Not a festival, he's done that. This is deeper. He wants to reawaken the ancient ecstatic rites of wine and rebirth. We'll blend the best of Greek Thyrsus rituals with Egyptian seed songs, he says, and maybe some interpretive clay dancing. You suggest maybe a little less clay. To prepare, you gather participants from both Greek and Egyptian communities. Neferet returns to co-lead balancing Dionysus's chaos with just enough grounded wisdom to keep things from dissolving into full nonsense. Together they craft an initiation rite that takes place over 3 nights under the waxing moon in a grove of sycamore trees sacred to Hathor. The first night is silence. Participants walk the grove barefoot, breathing in incense, listening to stories whispered by masked elders. One elderly man spends 40 minutes describing a dream he once had about a talking cucumber. Very wise, Dionysus whispers. The second night is sound. Drums, flutes, chants rising like wind through reeds. The crowd moves together, swaying like a field of wheat in a storm. The air smells like sweat and cardamom. Dionysus dances barefoot in saffron robes, his hair tangled with vine leaves and lapis beads. You keep your distance, guarding the perimeter with a lantern and the world's longest sigh. And then on the third night comes wine, not just drinking it, bathing in it, blessing it, painting with it. People weep into it, laugh through it, spill it on each other with wide grins and wild apologies. The grape becomes sacred, the vine becomes symbol, the night becomes eternal, or at least very sticky. A quirky little tidbit. There's a theory among fringe historians that some ancient Egyptian wine ceremonies included grape-stomping competitions judged by cats. You'd scoff, except Dionysus actually tries this, and one fluffy tabby takes her role very seriously. By sunrise, the grove is quiet. People sleep under stars' arms, linked dreams flickering like the last embers of a fire. Dionysus stands on a boulder, eyes puffy, voice hoarse. They remembered, he says, soft as reed wind. The joy was always in them. I just nudged it out. You want to say something sarcastic. You don't. You just nod. The next week, reports spread like wine through a cracked amphora. Word of mouth travels fast in Egypt, especially when it's slurred slightly by last night's leftovers. Other temples begin whispering about this foreign god who communes with vines and joy. Some are intrigued, some are furious. A delegation from the temple of Amun arrives unimpressed. They sit through one rite. They don't drink. They don't clap. One sneezes during a sacred grape chant. Dionysus shrugs. They'll come around. They don't. A warning follows: limit the ceremonies. Reduce the public gatherings. No more masks that resemble ibises playing tambourines. Tensions rise again, this time more quietly. Officially, the revival is allowed, so long as it doesn't disrupt established worship protocols. Unofficially, it's being watched very closely. You find a clay tablet left at the vineyard gate one morning, a depiction of a man being chased by crocodiles while holding a wine jug. Subtle, still Dionysus refuses to stop. Joy is a current, he tells you. It bends, it surges, but it doesn't retreat. You try to believe him, but you can't shake the feeling that someone is waiting. In the shadows of a disused temple, in the silence after the last drumbeat, in the way the Nile holds its breath when the wind dies down. Whatever joy Dionysus has rekindled, it's drawing attention. And not all of it is friendly. The days grow hotter. The kind of heat that makes clay pots crack and sandal straps melt into cobblestones. You carry a water skin everywhere, and still end up feeling like a roasted date by midday. The vineyard's canopy thickens, but the joy that once bubbled through the vines begins to ferment into something heavier, less like celebration, more like tension soaked in grape juice. You notice it first in the animals. The temple cats, normally too aloof to care about mortal affairs, start slinking along the periphery of Dionysus's nightly gatherings, ears, flat eyes glowing like tiny sensors. Ibises screech at dusk for no reason you can name. A bull calf collapses one morning, its eyes rolled back, the wine-stained sigil of Dionysus smeared across its flank like a whisper no one wants to admit hearing. Then one evening, Neferet doesn't show up. You wait and wait. The ceremony continues, but the rhythm is off. Dionysus falters during the libation chant. A clay mask shatters at someone's feet. A child cries, and nobody knows why. You end the night early saying it's the heat. Dionysus pretends to agree, but his vine crown slips sideways, and he doesn't fix it. The next morning you find Neferet in the shade of a half-buried shrine outside town, curled up like someone who's been listening too long to silence. Her face is pale, her voice threadbare. "They came to me," she says. "The old gods, or what's left of them, and they were angry." You sit beside her. The sand is already burning your legs through your tunic, but you don't move. She speaks like someone translating a dream from another dream. They say Dionysus is twisting the thread, that his rites pull too hard on what's been bound. The dead walk too close now. The Nile doesn't like it. You blink. The Nile. She nods. It remembers everything. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians truly believed their river held sentient memory, or if that was just poetic personification. But in that moment, sitting beside Neferet, you feel it too, a thick awareness in the air, like a god watching from just beneath the surface. Back at the vineyard, Dionysus is attempting to choreograph a ritual parade that involves donkeys' dyed linen streamers and a basket of figs no one is allowed to eat. You pull him aside. She says, "We're unbalancing things." He sighs deeply, dramatically. "I am balance. I am joy and grief order and wildness." Maybe, but Egypt has its own system. You're loud, that gets a smile out of him, but it fades fast. That night, lightning rips the sky apart, one enormous jagged vein pulsing in the heavens. Rain follows rare and sudden. The Nile surges with a force that feels personal. The next morning, the vineyard is flooded. Not ruined, but definitely soggy and startled. And there, right in the middle of the largest basin, stands a papyrus scroll balanced on a clay bowl. Inside, a formal invitation to the festival of Koyak, honouring Osiris's death and rebirth with a blank line for Dionysus's name added in faded ink. You exchange glances with Dionysus. Is this a trap, you ask? He shrugs. Possibly. But how can I resist a death and rebirth crossover event? He insists on attending, dragging along a slightly scorched offering basket filled with grapes myrrh and a very confused goose. The journey to Abydos takes several days through villages, now wary of your procession. Children point. Elders mutter. At one stop, a farmer tosses a withered cucumber at Dionysus. He catches it. A gift of the land, he beams. Abydos is ancient, older than legend. You feel it in the bones of the earth, in the glyphs, half swallowed by wind and time. The festival of Koyak is solemn structured, everything Dionysus isn't. Priests in dark linen chant beside a reed coffin filled with earth and sprouting barley symbolizing Osiris's resurrection. Dionysus watches quietly, respectfully even. You start to think maybe he's learning restraint. Then he offers the goose. The ceremony pauses. Everyone stares. The goose honks once, as if issuing an official complaint. A priest steps forward. His face is stern but not cruel. He accepts the offering with a nod, and the rite continues. But later that night, when the torches burn low and the stars hang like eavesdropping gods, you hear whispers near your tent. Too bright, one voice says. He brings too much fire. Wine isn't memory, says another. It drowns it. You clutch the hilt of your knife, even though it's mostly decorative, and possibly a letter opener. Dionysus sits nearby, staring at the moon. They're not wrong, he murmurs. You look over. His face is weary, still divine but frayed at the edges. I don't belong anywhere, really. Not for long. You want to comfort him, but how do you console someone who's half storm, half symphony? Instead, you lie down beside him, close enough to share the warmth, far enough to pretend you're just stargazing. A quirky little fact some early Hellenistic playwrights wrote Dionysus as a tragic figure. Joyful, yes, but always walking toward some kind of ending. A god who could never stay too long in one place, because joy too can sour. You fall asleep to the sound of drums in the distance. Not Dionysus's this time, these are slower, deeper. Mourning drums. Something is changing. The gods are shifting in their sleep, and the land remembers more than it forgives. The journey back from Abydos is quiet, too quiet for someone like Dionysus, who usually whistles, hums, or dramatically reenacts entire tragedies to pass the time. Now he rides in near silence atop a donkey, whose name he refuses to learn, trailing his fingertips through the tall grasses like he's feeling for a memory he can't quite reach. You think about what Neferet said, the balance tipping, the old god stirring. At night by the fire, Dionysus finally speaks. I thought they'd love me here, he says softly. Egypt is full of festivals, wine masks, magic. It's theatrical, it's sacred, it's me. You watch a fire beetle scuttle across the sand, leaving tiny glowing footprints. They don't hate you, you offer. They just don't know what you are yet. He nods, but it doesn't make the silence any lighter. When you return to the vineyard, things are strange. The vines are overgrown, twisting in ways they shouldn't. Some of the grapes have turned black, not with rot, but something richer, thicker, like they're fermenting on the vine. The workers are jumpy. A priest from the local temple of Sobek came by asking why frogs have started showing up in threes on people's thresholds. And then there's the statue. It wasn't there when you left. Now it looms at the edge of the vineyard, half buried in earth and ivy. A mix of Osiris and Dionysus, fused like a dream. Logic sculpture, wine cups in one hand, a crook and flail in the other, ivy wreath, twisted into a pharaoh's crown. No one claims to have made it, no one can move it. Historians still argue whether these so-called syncretic idols were genuine spiritual efforts or just let's please everyone politics in stone. But this one hums. That night the vineyard throws a festival, but not a Dionysian one. It's an odd blend, half morning rite, half harvest dance. There's chanting in both Greek and Demotic and offerings of pomegranates, barley bread and honeyed beer arranged in spiral patterns. You spot Neferet standing beside a scribe who's writing everything down with unnerving calm. Dionysus watches from a distance, a thin smile on his face. He doesn't join in. I'm being overwritten, he says, voice thick with honey and salt. You try to protest, but he shakes his head. No, it's not bad, it's just different. This is how it works, I think. Myth needs new skin now and then. He sounds almost reverent. Then he steals a honey cake from the offering table and vanishes into the vineyards like a naughty satyr. Over the next few days, the vineyard becomes a place people visit for blessings. Not just wine anymore. People ask for dreams, for memories, for release. And Dionysus delivers quietly now, through the fruit, through the scent of lavender smoke, through dreams that linger past morning. A woman with a dying son dreams of a banquet where he eats without pain. An old man sees his lost wife laughing in a room filled with golden light. A young scribe wakes with a complete hymn in his head and weeps as he writes it. You help where you can, refilling lamps, feeding the goats, telling wide-eyed pilgrims that no Dionysus is not currently available for private appearances. One night, Neferet pulls you aside. You know what this is, right? She asks, glancing around the moonlit vineyard. It's no longer a vineyard, it's a threshold. You shiver. The night wind carries the smell of crushed grapes and something else, wet stone and incense. Between life and death, you ask. She nods. Between memory and forgetting. Between gods. Another night, the stars hang low, thick as jasmine blooms. Dionysus returns from a long walk near the river and says nothing until he pours you a goblet of wine. It's darker than usual, almost blue-black. You sip, and suddenly you remember 100 things you didn't know you'd forgotten. Your childhood dog, the time your mother sang you to sleep during a sandstorm, a temple lantern flickering at the exact moment you fell in love with a stranger's laugh. You blink back tears. What is this? He leans in, voice barely a whisper. Vintage memory. A new blend. You laugh, then cry, then laugh again. He pats your head like a misbehaving apprentice. Don't get used to it. The recipe keeps changing. A quirky little fact in ancient Rome. Some wine vintages were believed to hold prophetic properties, drunk only on specific moon phases to induce visions. Dionysus seems to have reinvented that, but with emotional archaeology as the main export. More pilgrims arrive, quiet ones, desperate ones, curious ones. They sleep under olive trees and dream in languages they don't speak. You catch someone carving Dionysus's name beside Osiris's in a wall niche, the letters winding together like lovers. And then the crocodiles show up, 4 of them, marching in single file up from the Nile like they have an RSVP. They circle the syncretic statue once, then lie down around its eyes closed. Guardians or worshippers, you don't ask, but Sobek's temple sends a delegation the next day. The priests are not thrilled. Their leader, a tall woman with ivory in her braids, gestures at the statue. This is intrusion, she says. The land remembers its shape. Dionysus steps forward. Then let it reshape me. She narrows her eyes. Gods who bend become myths. He smiles, and myths who endure become gods again. They stare at each other for a long time, then she nods once and walks away. That night, frogs sing from every corner of the vineyard. The stars fall silent, and the dreams become sharper. People wake not just with memories but with answers, with regrets soothed, with futures glimpsed. Something is ripening beneath the surface. Not grapes, not quite godhood. Something stranger, something ready to burst. It begins with a crack, not in the earth or in the vines, but in the air itself, like reality catches its breath for a moment too long and forgets how to exhale. You're carrying a basket of figs through the vineyard when you feel it a low-pressure shift, the way the air thickens before a thunderstorm. Except there's no storm, just sky blue and watchful. And then the laughter starts. Not Dionysus, not this time. This laughter is older, stranger. It bubbles up from the statue itself, echoing faintly, from stone lips that have never moved. Birds scatter. The fig basket slips from your fingers and spills across the sand, dark ovals against pale dust. Dionysus arrives seconds later, eyes wide. Did you hear that? You nod. He looks at the statue, then at you, then back again. I think something's waking up. What that something is remains unclear for several days. The vineyard's air grows heavier and dreams turn more vivid. One woman wakes from a nap, insisting she saw both the birth and death of time, while a young merchant begins speaking in riddles that he claims are translations of wine thoughts. It's equal parts wonder and concern. Dionysus becomes restless. He roams further out, sometimes disappearing for days at a time. When he returns, he's covered in strange pollen-trailing vines that weren't there before. He won't talk about it. You try asking Nepheret, but she only shrugs. It's what gods do. They wander, they get rewritten, they molt. Molting seems apt. Dionysus is shedding something. His jokes grow more cryptic, his dances less frenetic and more ritualistic. He drinks less wine and stares more often into the dark between stars. The goats don't recognize him anymore, and honestly neither do you. But then he invites you on a walk. Midnight, no torches, just starlight, and whatever this new moon-shaped mood is. He leads you to the far edge of the vineyard, where the soil thins into rock and the Nile murmurs in the distance. There, hidden behind a screen of reeds, is something new. A circle of standing stones, each carved with alternating Greek and Egyptian inscriptions. They weren't here last week. At the centre stands a low table made of black basalt stained with dried grape juice, or something like grape juice. Welcome to the press, Dionysus says. You raise an eyebrow. We already have a wine press, he smirks. That one's for grapes, this one's for gods. He kneels beside the table and places a cluster of unripe fruit onto its surface. Then, instead of crushing them, he sings. softly, in a language you don't recognize, maybe a blend of Greek prayer and Egyptian hymn, or maybe just sound itself reshaping meaning. The fruit bursts without touch. Juice runs down the basalt in slow rivulets, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The scent is overpowering pomegranate fig myrrh, and something you can only describe as sunset on water. He looks up at you. This is how they do it here Osiris's way. Life pressed from death, story from silence. You kneel beside him, not sure what to say. He doesn't ask for anything, just sits there, in silence, watching the juice disappear into the grooves carved in the altar. The next morning a traveller arrives. She's unlike any of the others, wears no sandals, carries no offerings, speaks no Greek or Egyptian, but she knows Dionysus's name, calls him by older ones' names that twist your stomach when you try to repeat them. Dionysus greets her like an old friend. They talk for hours in a tongue that sounds like wind over broken amphorae. You don't understand a word. Later he explains she's a messenger from the other Nile, a mythic mirror realm found in the dreams of crocodiles and the shadows of ibis wings, a place where all rejected gods go to ferment, waiting for relevance to return. He's been invited to join them, not to leave necessarily, but to merge, to expand his myth sideways. You're not sure what that means? He just grins and tells you to think fractal. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's near vanishing from certain Egyptian records was a result of political suppression or simple theological incompatibility. But maybe it was neither. Maybe it was a sideways pivot into something undocumented. A quirky fringe belief in some ancient texts suggests that Dionysus could appear in multiple places at once, fracturing into dozens of regional avatars, each with their own festivals, wines and costumes. You're starting to believe it. Over the next few days, things shift again. The vineyard now includes fig trees that grow at impossible angles. Vines wrap themselves into geometric patterns that match temple floor mosaics. Bees begin to hum in scales that seem deliberate, like music waiting for lyrics. And then the children arrive. No parents, just kids. They come in small groups, wearing strange robes and garlands of unknown herbs. They say they were sent in dreams to help with the harvest. They speak in unison sometimes. They never blink at the same time. It's not creepy exactly, just unsettling. They pick the grapes carefully, placing them into silver bowls instead of baskets. They chant as they move nonsense syllables at first, but then you realise they're singing your memories. Snippets of your voice from years ago, threaded through lullabies. Dionysus seems delighted. They're dreamlings, he explains. Feral stories, probably harmless. Probably, he winks. The wine they help make is unlike any before, pale gold with threads of red, like sunrise trapped in liquid. It smells of endings and new beginnings, and no one can drink it without crying. Not from sadness, not from joy. Just release. You sip it one night alone beneath the statue and remember everything you've ever chosen to forget. The bad, the beautiful, the things that shaped you while you looked away. It's overwhelming. And then peaceful. You sleep better than you have in years. Whatever Dionysus is becoming, whatever the vineyard is turning into, it's working. People come not for spectacle, not for worship, but for healing. And the land accepts it. The vines bloom into the dry season. The frogs sing harmony. Even the crocodiles nod when you pass. Still something lingers. That pressure in the air again. Something's coming, something final. And Dionysus, he's smiling more. But it's the smile of someone who knows he's about to throw a party no one is ready for. You're dreaming again, but this time the dream speaks first. It doesn't wait for you to shape, it doesn't obey your subconscious like it's supposed to. It greets you by name, offers you a goblet and says, "Drink quickly." He's almost here. You wake with grape stains on your fingers and sandalwood ash in your hair. Not ominous at all. The vineyard feels different now. Thicker, as though reality's layers are sliding over one another and snagging on vine tendrils. Time doesn't flow here anymore. It pools, gathers, evaporates. You find yourself starting tasks and forgetting whether you've finished them. Conversations loop. You watch the same bird land on the same branch 4 times in 1 hour, and each time it drops a seed that wasn't there before. You mention this to Dionysus, and he just laughs. You're finally noticing. Good, he's been sketching. Not on parchment, but on the walls of time. You see him tracing patterns into air, speaking numbers into light. They hang there shimmering, then vanish like fireflies winking out mid-step. He claims he's tuning the vineyard like a lyre. The grapes are no longer the same either. Some shimmer faintly in the darks, others give off the scent of cinnamon or crushed lilies. One batch actually hums. You chew a grape that tastes like your first kiss and immediately forget the name of your second grade math teacher. This is the new vintage. Dionysus names it Ouroboros. You don't ask why. He's preparing for a feast now. Not a harvest festival, not a religious ceremony, something older, deeper. A reckoning masquerading as revelry. The invitations are cryptic, inscribed on fig leaves tucked into the mouths of jackal statues, whispered into the ears of dreaming ibis. Only some people hear them. Those who do arrive at odd hours in odd states. Some are covered in dust, others in gold. One woman shows up riding a hyena and swears she was led here by a song stuck in her head since childhood. Everyone's offered wine immediately. Most accept. A few decline and disappear. Dionysus makes no fuss. Their stories weren't ripe. One guest turns out to be an Egyptian astronomer who's mapped the stars since before the Greeks showed up with their god boxes. He says this patch of vineyard lines up perfectly with a once every 12,000 years constellation shift. Coincidence, you say? Absolutely not, Dionysus replies, grinning. Historians still argue whether this vineyard was deliberately constructed over some ancient ley line, or whether it just grew out of divine stubbornness. But one thing's clear, something's converging. You feel it when you sleep. Your dreams now feature symbols that persist after you wake, geometric shapes traced into your palms, foreign languages on your tongue. One morning you wake humming an Akkadian hymn, another you wake speaking backwards. You stop asking why. The preparations continue. Tables appear overnight, carved from a single slab of cedar that smells faintly of honey and sea salt. Platters shimmer even when empty. Musicians show up without instruments, then pluck music out of the air like it's fruit on a branch. Neferet takes over kitchen duties, though you're pretty sure half the recipes she's using are sourced from dreams and fever visions. The menu includes roasted lotus, root-fermented crocodile milk, cheese and something called sun-baked hyssop tears. You don't ask. Meanwhile, Dionysus grows lighter, literally. His feet barely touch the ground some days. He dances in slow circles, hands weaving spirals, hair haloed with firefly glow. Are you becoming a constellation? You ask, only half joking. Maybe, he says, but just for the weekend. The feast draws closer. On the eve before the vineyard turns completely silent. No frogs, no wind. Even the stars seem to hold their breath. That night, everyone receives a dream. The same dream. You're walking through a tunnel of vines that whisper your name, pulling memories from your skin like static. At the end stands a table Dionysus, at the head flanked by versions of himself, in every shape and shade, bearded and boyish, cloaked, and nude, weeping and laughing. He lifts a goblet. Tonight we drink not just for joy, but to remember what joy costs. You wake with a mouthful of grape skins, and then it's time. The guests assemble as the sun begins to set, turning the Nile into a ribbon of molten copper. The tables groan with offerings, the vines shimmer in anticipation. Dionysus arrives last, clothed in a robe stitched from dusk and desert wind. He raises a single hand. Silence descends, and then the music begins, not from instruments, but from the land itself. The reeds vibrate, the soil hums, and every guest feels their heartbeat sink to something older than time. Dionysus speaks not with words, but with presence, and the feast begins. Each course is paired with a story told, not aloud, but through sensation. You bite into a fig and remember being born. Sip a wine and feel every heartbreak you've ever known turn to vapour. One guest sobs uncontrollably. Another begins to levitate. You feel clean. Not in a sanitised way, but in a freshly rained-on street kind of way. Scrubbed by experience. rewritten in laughter and longing. Dionysus leans close and whispers, "You taste like someone who's finally learned how to be present." You blush, unsure whether to thank him or question how he knows what you taste like. Probably best not to ask. The feast stretches into night. Candles float above the table, flickering with memories instead of flame. Toasts are made in languages lost for millennia. A man with owl eyes sings a lullaby to the moon, and she blushes, or maybe that's just an eclipse. Eventually, one by one, the guests rise and leave, not walking, but dissolving into air, into light, into the stories they came from. By sunrise, only you, Neferet, and Dionysus remain. You sit in silence, surrounded by empty cups and full hearts. He looks at you, eyes soft. You were the only one who stayed the whole time. You nod. I had to see how it ended. He laughs. Who said anything about endings? The morning after the feast feels like waking inside a half-remembered poem. You wander the vineyard, which is no longer quite the vineyard you knew. The vines seem to pulse faintly, with a glow like they're still humming from last night's magic. A low vibration just beneath the surface of your skin. The soil is soft, almost springy underfoot, and the air tastes faintly of wild thyme and honey. Neferet is already at work, her hands deftly weaving fresh garlands of lavender and saffron to decorate the trellises. She glances at you with a knowing smile, as if to say, "Welcome back to the world that never quite believed it could be magical." Dionysus, meanwhile, is nowhere to be found. You search the rows, calling his name softly, but the only response is the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze that smells faintly of far-off rain. You find a single fig leaf resting on a stone edges gilded with shell gold, and suddenly you remember the feast was more than just a celebration, it was a rite of passage. You can't help but smile, even though a small part of you wonders what's next. You've tasted divine presence, danced on the edge of myth, and yet the vineyard remains rooted in the earth, stubbornly mortal. Walking back to the villa, you pass the jackal statues, which seem less menacing, now more like silent guardians of secrets whispered in the dark. Historians still argue whether this vineyard was truly a meeting point of gods and mortals, or merely an elaborate allegory crafted by poets and dreamers. But the stories linger, shimmering like heat on desert stone. You catch yourself humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like an Akkadian lullaby you learned during the feast. An odd souvenir, but you'll take it. That afternoon, Neferet invites you to taste the new vintage bottled moments from last night's revelry. The wine is richer than any you've ever tasted, with hints of fig star anise and something indefinably ancient. It's not just wine, she says quietly, it's memory distilled. You raise your cup, the liquid catching the light like molten amber, and toast to the unknown paths ahead. As the sun sinks low, casting long shadows over the vineyard, you feel a gentle pull, a promise that the story isn't over, only just beginning. And somewhere in the distance, you swear you hear Dionysus laughing. The twilight hour settles softly over the vineyard, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep indigos. You find yourself seated on a low stone wall, watching fireflies flicker like tiny lanterns in the gathering dark. The air smells of crushed herbs and damp earth, a rich perfume that carries the promise of night's secrets. Dionysus appears again, slipping from the shadows, with that mischievous grin that could unsettle even the most steady soul. His robes, woven from midnight silk and embroidered with golden ivy, shimmer faintly in the moonlight. He beckons you to follow him deeper into the vineyard, where ancient stone altars stand half hidden among the leaves. This, he says softly, is where the true work begins. You trail behind him, heart thumping, not entirely from fear, more from the thrill of entering a realm where myth and reality blur. The altars are carved with strange symbols, grapes entwined with serpents, lions drinking from chalices, stars and moons, interlaced with thorny vines. A delicate veil of incense curls upward, its scent both soothing and strangely invigorating. Dionysus kneels, offering a small goblet filled with a dark, shimmering liquid. Drink, he urges, not to forget, but to remember. You take the cup, the cool wine sliding down your throat with a burst of sweetness and a whisper of wildness. The world shifts, colours deepen, sounds sharpen, and Suddenly, you're seeing the vineyard not just with your eyes, but with every sense attuned to something older than time. Neferet appears beside you, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames from nearby torches. The gods are patient, she murmurs, but they are also persistent. You ponder the delicate balance between mortal toil and divine influence. Historians still argue whether vineyards like this were sacred spaces devoted to the gods, or simply practical agricultural experiments elevated by poetic imagination. But here under the night sky, the boundary feels impossibly thin. You lean back, letting the cool night air wrap around you as stories and songs, half forgotten and half imagined, fill the silence. Somewhere nearby, a jackal howls, a reminder of the wild, untamed forces still at play beneath the cultivated vines. As you breathe in the night's magic, you realize patience is not passive waiting. It's a dance with time, nature, and the divine, all entwined in a slow, endless waltz. You smile, ready for whatever the dawn may bring. The dawn creeps in like a shy cat, softening the edges of the vineyard with pale gold light. You wake under a sky streaked with pastel clouds, the scent of crushed grapes mingling with morning dew. Around you, the vines stretch like lazy arms toward the sun, heavy with ripening fruit. Dionysus is already at work, his hands deft and sure as he tends the rows. His laughter bubbles up a light-hearted melody that contrasts with the solemnity of the land. Nearby, Neferet carries a wicker basket, brimming with grapes, her russet robes fluttering in the gentle breeze. You join them, feeling the cool weight of a cluster of grapes in your hand, the skins taut and bursting with juice. The task is simple but rhythmic, picking, sorting, placing the heartbeat of the vineyard. There's a sacredness here, in this humble labour, a connection between earth and soul. The Egyptians believed that wine was not merely a drink, but a sacred gift, a bridge between mortals and gods, celebrated in ritual and revelry alike. You wonder if Dionysus understands this, or if he's simply entranced by the pleasure of creation. Historians still argue whether the introduction of winemaking to Egypt was a result of cultural exchange or independent innovation. But here in this vineyard, those debates feel distant. What matters is the act itself, tending, waiting, hoping. A quirky fact crosses your mind: some ancient Egyptian winemakers added fragrant herbs like juniper and myrrh to their blends, creating complex flavours that tickled the senses and perhaps the gods' curiosity. It's a reminder that patience includes experimentation and the courage to try new things. You breathe deeply, savouring the mingling scents of grapes and herbs, the warmth of the sun on your skin. In this moment, patience is a quiet companion, teaching you that growth, whether of vines or dreams, cannot be rushed, only nurtured with steady hands and open hearts. You smile, ready to face whatever this day will unfold. The afternoon sun blazes, casting sharp shadows across the dusty courtyard where the first pressings take place. You watch as Dionysus oversees the workers, their feet stained purple, stomping grapes in a large wooden vat, the juice oozing between their toes like a slow river of promise. Nearby, wooden buckets and woven baskets overflow with the day's harvest, their russet and teal cloth linings fluttering in the dry breeze. The air is thick with a heady mix of sweet fermentation and sun-baked earth, a scent that makes you dizzy in the best way. Dionysus moves with an effortless grace, directing the process with a joyful energy that lifts the spirits of everyone around. It's clear he sees the vineyard as more than just a place. It's a living, breathing community united by shared labour and hope. You catch Neferet carefully, tending to a small fire, her hands steady, as she stokes it beneath a large clay vessel filled with crushed grapes and fragrant herbs, a medieval-era concoction meant to coax out the deepest flavours. The delicate use of fire and earth echoes ancient Egyptian rituals, where winemaking was intertwined with ceremonies invoking the gods' favour. Historians still argue whether these early fermentation techniques were entirely borrowed from Mediterranean cultures or developed independently in Egypt, but the blend of tradition and innovation here is undeniable. Every step in the process is a delicate dance between nature's timing and human ingenuity. A quirky tidbit: some vintners believed that singing to the vats encouraged fermentation, a melodic accompaniment said to charm the yeasts into their work. Whether magic or myth, it's a lovely thought that even microbes might have their own soundtrack. As the sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the workers' stained feet and flushed faces, you feel the rhythm of creation, pulse strong and sure, a testament to patience, perseverance, and the simple joy of making something beautiful from the earth. Twilight creeps over the vineyard, draping the leaves in dusky indigo, and casting flickering shadows from the torches scattered around the press. You hear the soft clink of iron fire tongs as Neferet tends a nearby brazier, her russet robe glowing warmly in the firelight. The air has cooled, but the scent of fermenting grapes mingled with crushed herbs still hangs thick, rich, and intoxicating. Dionysus leans against a wooden barrel, swirling a glass of freshly pressed wine, his eyes half-lidded in satisfaction as he surveys the fruits of the day. Around him, workers rest, wiping sweat from brows and sharing quiet stories beneath the shimmering stars, painted with tiny gilded flourishes in the parchment sky above. The moment feels sacred, a pause between the chaos of creation and the promise of something new. You notice a small woven basket beside Neferet, filled with dried marigold petals and bunches of fragrant thyme. Natural preservatives added to the mix, an ancient method believed to ward off spoilage. It's a reminder that patience is not just waiting, but nurturing and protecting what you've sown, much like guarding a fragile secret until it's ready to bloom. Historians still argue whether the spiritual rituals around winemaking here were influenced more by Greek Dionysian mystery cults or indigenous Egyptian beliefs. But either way, the blending of faith and craft is a powerful undercurrent shaping the vineyard's rhythm. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some vintners believed that the laughter of children planted near the vines could encourage sweeter grapes, an early superstition about joy feeding the earth. Whether true or not, it's a charming nod to the belief that happiness itself is a vital ingredient. As you settle into the cool night, the gentle murmur of conversation, the soft crackle of flames, and the promise held in every drop of wine invite you to reflect on the slow, sacred art of transformation. The vineyard rests under a moon, softened by the whisper of clouds silvering the rows of vines, and the stone press like a dream, suspended in time. You feel the cool earth beneath your feet, solid and steady, while the faint rustle of leaves sings a lullaby only the night knows. Around you, the distant sound of a lyre drifts on the breeze, its notes weaving between stars and shadows. Dionysus sits quietly beside Neferet, the two figures bathed in gentle moonlight, sharing stories and silent understanding. His usual exuberance is softened, replaced by a calm reverence that feels earned. The long days of toil, trial, and unexpected friendship have settled into something deep and abiding. You notice how the rich indigo of his cloak seems almost to merge with the velvet sky, a symbol of his place between mortal and divine. Nearby, the last of the workers fold their arms and lean back on wooden buckets, eyes heavy, but spirits light, while the vineyard breathes around them, alive with the promise of future harvests, each grape a patient miracle of time and care. Historians still debate whether this unique blending of Greek and Egyptian winemaking traditions laid the groundwork for the Mediterranean's later vintages. But what remains certain is that here in this quiet moment, patience has revealed its profound power, the art of transformation, connection, and trust. You smile, remembering the tale of the sacred crocodile dung sunscreen from long ago, a quirky reminder that sometimes the oddest ingredients and the longest waits are exactly what creates something extraordinary. As your eyelids grow heavy and the night deepens, you let yourself drift with the vineyard's timeless rhythm, cradled by the gentle lesson that patience in the end is a gift one you can carry softly, like a secret sip of something sweet. The vineyard story lingers soft and slow as your breathing eases and your thoughts unfurl like tendrils of mist in the early dawn. You've travelled far tonight, not just across lands and myths, but through the delicate dance of waiting and becoming. The day's trials, the gentle rituals, the laughter and the lessons, all blend into a quiet harmony. Remember that patience is not just an absence, but a presence, a steady nurturing force flowing through all living things, from the smallest grape to the grandest god. Let it settle with you now, a calm pulse beneath the quiet dark, a warm ember that glows when you close your eyes. So, as the last stars fade and the world prepares to wake, breathe in the peace of this ancient vineyard, and know that some of the best things in life, like fine wine and stories worth telling, are worth waiting for. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.